So I just want to remind people how the military-industrial complex funded news covers war. This is the CNN reporter they sent to Syria to investigate a suspected chemical attack. And watch how she investigates.
And there's definitely something that stings.
So, if I was a reporter on the ground in a war zone where a chemical attack just happened and I thought there was deadly gas on a backpack, the first thing I would do is start sniffing it. And it's amazing. She's still alive. She's still alive, ladies and gentlemen. Ooh, that sarin gas sure is spicy. I saw it featured as a sauce one time on Hot Ones. And Jeff Goldblum said the same thing. It stings. Yeah. So that's how they cover it. And so now, and then people like Aaron Mate and the Gray Zone and me come along and debunk their gas attack reporting in Syria or Venezuela or Libya or wherever it happens. We debunk CNN's coverage, which is just repeating the State Department and CIA talking points, which is what they do at CNN and places like the Young Turks. So we come along and we debunk it. So now they've invented their own quote unquote independent news. Who did? The government, the United States and the UK government have done this, right? And it's called Bellingcat. Now, we've told you about this before, and I'm going to refresh your memory. Bellingcat has smeared me personally at the show, also smeared Aaron Mate, and it's great to see that 60 Minutes is now in bed with them. Of course they are, because the government created this. The government created a pretend independent news agency so they can then push pro-war propaganda and then try to discredit people like Aaron Mate as he wins an award doing his anti-war coverage in Syria. Bellingcat is there to try to discredit Aaron Mate. And that's who this guy is. This is the guy from Bellingcat. And so Aaron Mate, so 60 Minutes did a thing on them just this week. And Aaron says it's a duty of any news outlet covering or citing Bellingcat to inform its audience that Bellingcat is funded by the United States and the UK governments, as well as several spook firms that profit off of U.S. regime change wars. Let's see if 60 Minutes does that. Let's see. Are you ready? By the way, I don't know where you went to journalism school, Aaron. But I'm pretty sure it's their duty not to reveal things that could hurt the war effort, okay? So here we go.
I feel it's almost my duty that when we're faced with all this information showing terrible things that are happening, is to pull it out there. It does involve risk, but...
So I just think it's great. He says, well, let me just play it again.
I feel it's almost my duty that when we're faced with all this information showing terrible things that are happening, is to pull it out there.
That's why I only look into terrible information on NATO's enemies. I don't want to end up like Julian Assange. So that's what this guy does. So that's what Bellingcat does. Whatever the CIA and State Department wants them to say about a war, that's what they do. They start writing stuff like that. So they're not putting out truthful information. They're putting out propaganda that is pro-war, pro-CIA, and pro-imperialism. That's what they do. And also, he's being paid by several intelligence agencies. So that's why they do that, too. That's his duty. Okay.
It does involve risk, but then defending liberty, human rights, democracy involves taking risks. It's when we stop taking risks and we let the fear take hold that we see democracy die.
Oh, sure, it's dangerous. He's got to take risks, Aaron. It is dangerous. I mean, some of these CIA and MI6 people scare the shit out of him. But he figures if he keeps his head down and do as he told, he probably won't get Epsteined eventually. That's what he's saying. It is very brave to report the war crimes of your country's enemies so that hopefully they can be tried at a war court that your own country doesn't subscribe to because they would be prosecuted for war crimes in that war court. Isn't that kind of amazing? Okay, here we go.
See a Russian armored column.
We met Elliot Higgins last month in London as Bellingcat was building a database of social media exposing apparent war crimes in Ukraine.
That guy's voice makes it sound real. It does. He's got that announcer voice, and he has a seriousness that it imparts with the timbre in his voice. It sounds real, doesn't it, Aaron?
It sounds very real, and that's why they use him for every single segment pushing a national security state scam. He's
Pelley?
The guy, Scott Pelley. Syria, Russia, you name it. It's always his, announcer voice pushing it.
Okay, here we go.
Eyewitness accounts of attacks on neighborhoods, assaults on hospitals, and murders of civilians are being collected and published on Bellingcat's website for all to see.
This is actually the location where the woman was killed.
Nearly everyone in Ukraine is a witness with a camera. Bellingcat is combining tens of thousands of social media posts to make them searchable by place and time.
And we look at as many sources as possible and use those sources to build a picture of what happened. Videos, photographs, satellite imagery. Then we look at the witness statements and the various allegations made by either side.
Locations and times are corroborated with independent sources, including satellite images and Google Street View. The goal is to provide verified evidence for future criminal trials.
And it also means that we're collecting an archive of material.
Future criminal trials in a court that the United States doesn't recognize or participate in because we commit the most war crimes in the world. Scott Pelley's not going to tell you that, and neither is this guy. But we're going to tell you that here on YouTube until they shut us down.
For future generations, they can go back and look at this material. I mean, it's often said that, history is written by the victors, but it's being written now and it's being preserved now.
So so Aaron says, remember he asked the question, is 60 Minutes going to tell you who funds this group? Turns out, update, 60 Minutes did not inform its audience that Bellingcat is funded by the U.S. and U.K. governments, as well as several spook firms that profit off the U.S. regime change wars. And what I say to that was, what does that have to do with anything, Aaron? You just think because he gets his where he gets his funding from, it affects his reporting? If that were true, Aaron, the Young Turks would be a joke right now. If funding really affected reporting, then Microsoft NBC would be the trusted even less than Fox News. Imagine that. A crazy world like that. Imagine that. So here's the funding. I'll show you. Here's the funding. So there's income from companies, actuals, budget, actuals, Zandstorm, ZFE, Adam Smith International, Zinc Network, Comonix International, other companies, the EU. That's the governments that fund them. The European Union funds them. Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Plus, I know they get funding from NED. What are these companies here?
Well, so Adam Smith International is a war profiteer. It made a lot of money in Iraq and it made a lot of money in Syria, essentially helping to whitewash and support the sectarian death squads that the U.S. and its allies were backing in the Syria dirty war. And so this only came out last year. So this is startling. It's also another firm called Chemtronics.
Yeah.
They're called, or Chemonix.
Chemonix
so
International.
Chemonix and Adam Smith are two war profiteers, particularly involved in Syria, where Bellingcat does so much, a quote unquote investigation. So basically, Bellingcat is taking money, not just from governments, but from spook firms that profit off of these governments' dirty wars, especially in Syria. And by the way, the amount of money that they've gotten from U.S. taxpayers via the National Endowment for Democracy, which is basically a regime change arm of the CIA, it's unknown. If you look at the NED's database, the NED has a database of all the people that it funds, all the groups that it funds. You won't even find a trace of Bellingcat, even though it's acknowledged, it's public knowledge that the NED has funded Bellingcat. We don't even know how much money they've received from U.S. taxpayers. So everybody in the U.S. that pays taxes, you've given money to the shady group Bellingcat, and we have no idea to know actually how much it is.
We don't even know. So when you see 60 Minutes doing a story on a guy like this and say that this guy's some kind of truth teller, some independent truth teller setting up a website database that documents war crimes, What Scott Pelley is doing is earning his $1 million because he is pretending that this guy who works directly for the U.S. government and for weapons manufacturers is somehow telling you the truth about anything instead of manufacturing consent for more war. And that's what 60 Minutes was doing. They're manufacturing consent for more war. And so this is what, so his name is Elliot Higgins. He is British. It says he's occupation blogger, weapons analyst, and citizen journalist. You know how he's qualified to be a weapons analyst? He just said so. He has no qualifications to be a weapons analyst. He just made it up. And I'm all, by the way, I never told you this, but I am a weapons analyst too. I'm a better weapons. I'm a nuclear weapons analyst. I analyze nuclear weapons, which is much more important than just a regular weapons analyst. I'm a senior nuclear weapons analyst at the Jimmy Dore Show. And I'm speaking to a super senior chemical weapons analyst. I'm a little bit better than him because I do nuclear, but he does, Aaron Mate does the chemicals. So he's just doing regular, which isn't much. Known for analysis of the Syrian civil war and the downing of the MH17. Do you want to know what that's what he's known for? For his
Jimmy,
reporting.
let me say quickly.
Go ahead.
Jimmy, let me say quickly. I'm not joking when I say this. There's an interview with him in the New York Times from a few years ago where he literally says that he credits his expertise to playing video games.
That's true.
I'm not joking. He actually said that.
That's right. I remember that now that you mentioned it. I should have grabbed it for this report.
So those are his credentials.
His credentials is that he says he's a weapons analyst with no training. And he also says he played a lot of video games. And so, I guess, again, he's best known for his Syrian civil war and for the downing of MH17. Why do I keep saying that? Because it's interesting to note, by 2015, his propaganda operation had become so discredited that the German news magazine Der Spiegel was forced to apologize for its uncritical recycling of Bellingcat allegations that the Russian Defense Ministry manipulated satellite images and data to support its position. So, the thing he's best known for, the people who repeated his reporting were discredited, and they had to distance themselves from him. On MH17, according to Jens Kreis, an expert in digital image forensics, Bellingcat's technique of error correction analysis was subjective and not based entirely on science. This is why there is not a single scientific paper that addresses it. So that's who this guy is, right? He's a paid 100% propagandist. And what he does is he comes after people like who tell the truth about war, like Aaron Mate and myself. Elliot, when can you come on my show so you can expose me? That's what I said to him. Anytime at all. Of course you won't, because you're a coward who takes government money to push war and smear anti-war truth tellers. He responded to me on Twitter. He said, honestly, I didn't have a clue who you were until Charles wrote that article. So they wrote an article about me at his website. But I'm so unimportant, he didn't even know who I was until someone did a fucking story about me on his website. Do you see how ridiculous that is? He says, I didn't have a clue who you were until Charles wrote the article, so I'd rather spend my time being interviewed by people I've actually heard of. Thanks, Jimmy. I'll stick with people I've heard of. You know, shadowy security state officials most people have never heard of. So have you heard of Elliot Higgins? No. But Elliot Higgins, by the way, too busy to do an interview on my show, but not too busy to do an article about me at his website. Isn't there's something. And here's what this is about. So there's an anti-war, anti-interventionist group called the Serena Shim Award. They give you a Serena Shim Award. She was a journalist who was killed by governments for exposing. So this is them, Bellingcat. It says a shadowy pro-Assad lobby group is giving out creepy awards to conspiracy theorists. What could possibly go wrong? So they were giving an award to Kim Iverson, and that's what he tweeted out. They're giving an award to Kim Iverson for telling the truth about propaganda against Syria. And she got that award. I got that award. And
I
here's
got it too.
and Aaron got that award. And here is their article. Pro-Assad lobby group rewards bloggers on both the left and the right. A shadowy group that supports Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. A shadowy group. Unlike Bellingcat. A shadowy group that supports Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad is giving thousands of dollars to far-right activists, conspiracy websites, YouTube personalities, and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. So when they want to make Julian Assange out to be someone who's an enemy of the people instead of someone who's a defender of the people and anti-war exposer of the governments, that's when you know who you're dealing with. You're dealing with the CIA. That's who this guy is. Under the guise of an award for uncompromised integrity journalism. Okay. That's right. I won a creepy that year. That's what I won. I won a creepy. Every Halloween, a shadowy anti-war group gives out a spooky award to a scary blogger. Well, here it is. Here's the article. And it says, among those winners is Jimmy Dore, a comedian turned political commentator who was employed by the Young Turks, a progressive video outlet, until April 2019. According to an IRS filing, however, Dore actually began receiving money from the association behind the Serena Shim Award. In 2017, he received $2,500 for what will later be described as humanitarian media or human rights media. The same year, Dore would argue that a chemical weapons attack on the opposition-held town of Khan Shaykhun was likely a false flag, the bodies of dead children having been planted, perhaps by extremists. The United Nations has confirmed that the Syrian government, the only party to the conflict known to possess the sarin and an air force, was responsible. And then he goes on to link to my story about it. There it is. Reporter actually in Syria exposes media lies about everything. So I don't know if that was my video featuring Aaron Mate or someone else, but I don't know if you noticed that I had to spell out Syria. Did you see it? Did you see how I had to spell out Syria? So that's so the algorithm doesn't suppress the mentions of Syria, Elliot. You know that? That's what you have to do when you're not a shill for the government. You have to do things like this so that they don't suppress your work. I have to put dashes in between each letter so the algorithm doesn't suppress it. You don't have to worry about that because you're doing pro-war propaganda for the people who are in bed with Google and the censors. And I guess his problem was I didn't report that money up front. Don't just, because that's what I think he's saying. Why don't you? What he's saying is don't just report on it and wait for random tips, idiot. Find out what they want you to say first and then just invoice them, because that's what he does. He just finds out he just calls up his handler at the CIA or the NED, and he says, hey, how would you like me to report on Jimmy Dore and the Serena Shim Award? How would you like me to smear Aaron Mate? What do you want me to say about the chemical weapon? How do you want me to cover Ukraine? And then he just invoices them.
Jimmy, we exposed at the Gray Zone. This was an article by Max Blumenthal, where he got leaks from inside the British government showing that British officials were essentially bragging that they could deploy Bellingcat at their whim for propaganda purposes in Eastern Europe to counter Russia, which is, of course, their main focus. So Bellingcat, literally, according to the British government's own documents, is a tool of the British national security state. And that's why when Max published the article at the Gray Zone, Twitter gave it a very special warning, saying that, warning,
yes,
this material might be based on hacks.
Yeah.
Which was a confirmation that this was genuine material. And they wanted to scare people away from reading it because it was so damning to Bellingcat, Bellingcat being a tool of the establishment. Of course, it backfired because people became way more interested in reading about something that the government didn't want them
That's
to
right. So that
read
was
about. But the irony of them calling us shadowy, also, it's not just that. There are British journalists like Peter Hitchens and also a group called Declassified that have tried to find out how much is the British government paying Bellingcat? And what is the extent of their cooperation? Because Bellingcat's involved in all these, something called the Open Information Partnership, which is a British government propaganda operation. So Peter Hitchens and Declassified try to find out, what does that mean? And how much money is Bellingcat getting? And the British government responded by saying, like, we can't disclose that information, essentially, that we can't tell you. So that is shadowy. That's what a shadowy
that is what
organization
exactly
really is.
And And I forgot what I was just going to say. God damn it, because you kept talking.
Well, let me say more, Jimmy. Bellingcat arose because of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks posed a major threat to the establishment because WikiLeaks was informing the world based on genuine documents, the Western government's own secrets and own crimes, based on these governments' own documents via leaks from Chelsea Manning, and then later on Edward Snowden as well. Okay, so in response to these disclosures, Bellingcat came along, and now their way of getting out information is not based on state secrets. It's based on something called basically open signals intelligence, where they want us to believe that using Google Image and other open source information that they can somehow, with their digital wizardry, pin the blame on who is responsible for war crimes. It just so happens that in every major incident, the culprit always happens to be a designated enemy of their funders, the US and UK governments.
And so it's just funny to me that they try to make a scandal out of this group giving me an award of $2,500 for doing good reporting, anti-war reporting about Syria. $2,500. I don't know if you know how much money that is. Our good friend Gordon Dinmack says, extra, extra, read all about it. People who don't want war once thanks Jimmy Dore for doing good journalism on a story the Orwellian.org now smearing him got dead wrong on purpose by paying him enough to keep him in hair dye for 6 months. And by the way, that only buys enough dye for the drapes. Forget about matching the carpet.
Yeah. Jimmy, listen, I'm proud to get that award. I got it too. The idea, first of all, that we could be bought for any amount of money is pretty funny, especially when you're talking about, like whatever, $2,500 or $5,000, like whatever it is. But also, that group that gives out that award, they're involved in a 501c3, a nonprofit in the US, which is registered, which is involved in charity inside Syria and is one of the few groups that has been able to manage the massive US sanctions regime that is designed to prevent Syria from existing, and to prevent it from rebuilding from the US dirty war. So I'm honored to be to be awarded by people associated with that, because they're actually trying to overcome the medieval impact of US sanctions. And so they're recognizing people who display similar ethics. And they want to, for all the people who claim that some sort of Assad government lobby group and all that stuff, if there was really evidence of that, you think they'd be allowed to exist as a 501c3 nonprofit in the US that is tax deductible? You really think that Bellingcat and all these other smear artists are smarter than the Treasury Department and the IRS? I mean, it's just ridiculous. They want to smear people for doing anti-war journalism because their job is to do pro-war journalism, or not pro-war journalism, pro-war propaganda masquerading as journalism.
So they asked on Twitter, they asked Elliot, who pays you? How do you get your funding? He just admitted it. He says the NED. There it is. National Endowment for Democracy. There it is. That's the United States government. He just admits it. The NED, Adesium, Porticus, the Dutch Postcode Lottery, OSF, is about half our income. We also just started a project to train journalists with the Zinc Network, who are funded by the UK FCO. That's the Foreign Correspondence Office. So they're admitting that they're funding.
Foreign Commonwealth Office, yeah.
They're funding by both governments directly.
Yeah.
So
and the Dutch lottery.
So there you go.
The Dutch
there
lottery
you go.
The Dutch government. Yeah.
What's that?
And the Dutch lottery basically means Dutch taxpayers. That's what that basically means. It's another way to funnel NATO money to organizations that do NATO's bidding. That's why we call at the Gray Zone Bellingcat a NATO troll farm. That's what they are. For all the hysteria about troll farms in the US, that Russian troll farm that supposedly turned Americans against each other and got everyone to not vote for Hillary Clinton. That's what Bellingcat is. It's a troll farm carrying out propaganda on behalf of its paymasters. And again, when he says the NED, if you were to ask him, how much have you gotten from the NED, from the National Endowment for Democracy, they won't say. So we have no idea. And part of the reason we don't know is because no US media outlet that cites them as credible is willing to tell their audience that they're funded by the US government. Because if you were to tell someone, oh, by the way, the group that I'm presenting here as an authority is a US government funded organization, people actually might be more skeptical of it because people understand intuitively that governments fund propaganda. And that's why the media outlets that do propaganda for the government can't tell us that they're funded by the U.S. government.
So Scott Pelley at 60 Minutes, he knows all this, what we're saying. He knows that Bellingcat is funded by the governments of the UK and the United States and that they're really just pro-war propagandists. He can't not know that, right?
I have to believe he does know that. Yeah, it's pretty hard to avoid. I mean, if he doesn't know that, then he's even worse at his job. So yeah, no, like you have to assume that he does know that.
And so what does that make you think? I mean, you're a professional award-winning journalist. What does that make you think about a venerated news outlet like 60 Minutes and a guy like Scott Pelley doing straight up 100% propaganda and knowing they're doing it?
That's their job. That's what they do. That's the function of these outlets. There was a time when there was some space for dissent in some places. Like, you know, there's a great journalist named Andrew Coburn. And you go back to the 80s and you look at what the stuff he made for PBS with his wife, Leslie Coburn. They exposed the CIA's role in arming Contras and helping them deal drugs, essentially. The CIA's role in the drug trade. That aired one time on PBS's Frontline, okay, a major show. No way you would have that now.
No way.
So we've regressed where major media outlets across the spectrum have become arms of the state. And look, Jimmy, let me say a word about what Bellingcat's done in Syria, because that's where really they've been at their most diabolical and criminal. They're directly involved in covering up war crimes in Syria, and really terrible ones. And in the process, trying to manufacture consent for U.S. airstrikes on Syria based on the false premise that the Syrian government was guilty. I'm thinking of two chemical attacks. The first was August 2013, the worst chemical attack Syria has seen, when sarin was used. It killed hundreds of civilians in Syria. And Higgins came out with these measurements that he said proved that the range of the rockets that were used to fire sarin on Ghouta had to have meant that the rockets had to have come from Syrian government-controlled territory, meaning that the Syrian government was guilty of firing on Ghouta, firing sarin at Ghouta. And the media widely cited his supposed calculations. Then Ted Postal, who was an eminent professor at MIT, former Pentagon consultant, and a partner of his, who was a former weapons inspector, came out with calculations showing that actually the range of the rocket that Higgins had produced was a fraud. And that in fact, the range of the rockets showed that the rockets could only have been fired from inside insurgent controlled territory. And so outlets like the New York Times, which had initially cited Higgins' calculations, had to walk that back and essentially retract what Higgins had done. And yet still Higgins somehow claimed he was vindicated, basically lying through his teeth. So what he was doing there was trying to whitewash the complicity of sectarian death squads that were carrying out a false flag to falsely blame Syria for the attack. And that allegation was used to manufacture consent for Obama bombing Syria, which he almost did. And the reason he didn't, as Cy Hirsch later reported, was because U.S. intelligence officials, including James Clapper, went to him and essentially presented the same evidence that Ted Postal had found publicly, which is that it was not the Syrian government that did it. So that's why Obama actually didn't bomb. But this did nothing to hurt Higgins' reputation. And he did it again in Duma in April 2018, where the Syrian government was accused of committing a chlorine attack on Duma. And we saw those images of dead bodies inside Duma. And Trump did bomb Syria based on those allegations. And Bellingcat was tasked to basically put out some junk science confirming that Syria was guilty. But then a problem arose for them. The OPCW whistleblowers came along. The actual OPCW inspectors from the world's top chemical weapons watchdog, who went to Syria, did an investigation on the ground, wrote up a report, found no evidence that a chemical attack had occurred, and found plenty of evidence that this was in fact staged by insurgents on the ground, if you read their report closely. But the problem is we never saw that evidence, at least initially, because their reports were doctored and censored. And we only knew about them because eventually they got leaked. So Bellingcat was then used to attack the OPCW whistleblowers, to come out with false claims about them. I exposed one of them where essentially they put out a fake document that they said disproved one of the OPCW whistleblowers. I then got leaked showing that that document was a fraud, which they had to essentially retract. But none of this penetrates the media wall that's been erected to sustain the false narrative that Syria is guilty and sustain the false narrative that Bellingcat is somehow credible. It just does not penetrate because this is such an important propaganda operation for the U.S. war machine.
Even a place like the World Socialist website, before they got infiltrated by the security state, they knew it. They said the Bellingcat Research Collective, war propaganda masquerading as citizen journalism. That was back in 2016. That was before the World Socialist website got completely infiltrated by the security state and CIA, which they are now. Well, anyway, so there you go. Now you know who Bellingcat is, and now you know how war propaganda works and what Chomsky was talking about when he said that the corporate news manufactures consent. They're manufacturing consent for war by showing a guy like Elliot, what the fuck's his? Higgins and Bellingcat as being the exact opposite of what they are. They're not independent. They're not truth teller. They're paid by the government to lie us into wars and smear anti-war journalists. That's what Bellingcat is. That's what Elliot Higgins is. And that's what 60 Minutes is. So now you know the rest of the story. Hey, I'm on tour. Come see me in Irvine, California, Las Vegas, Indianapolis, Salt Lake City, Washington. Washington? You mean Washington State?
Yes.
Yes. Go to jimmydorcomedy.com for a link for all those tickets.